Josh Wilson, God help us get revolutionary. My suspicion is that this is what we're going to be talking about over this next hour, and I'm going to invite you to join into our conversation. You might have your own wisdom to contribute. Shortly, we'll open our talkback lines on 1800 316 316, getting some wisdom and insight today from an organisation that has, catch this, 150 missionaries. Now, interesting how you might define a missionary, but 150 missionaries in Australia. So if we talk about how we connect with people, we might be interested in the connection that these big organisations that are interested in the Great Commission and reaching Australia for Christ, what sort of wisdom we might be able to glean. I mean, you might know people who are interested in spiritual things, but have very little desire to visit a church. It's easy to feel a little inadequate and under-equipped to bridge the gap between where our friends are and where we'd like them to be. Don't you think it's a good thing to have an aspiration that your friends might become followers of Christ just as you are? Well, we're coming around an initiative today called MyFriends that connects people to Jesus and to each other. Our special guest today calls it lifestyle training. It's a component of the ministry focus of the biggest mission mobilization in the world. Geoff Folland is National Leader of Strategic Engagement at Power to Change in Australia. Now, Power to Change is part of the global Campus Crusade for Christ. That's been known as CRU since about 2012, and in Australia it's called Power to Change. And when we say big, they have as many as 25,000 staff worldwide across something like 190 nations. Geoff Folland is joining us. Geoff, a special welcome along to 2020.
Good morning, Neil. Great to talk to you this morning.
Geoff, before we get into the meat of our conversation today, lots of people, if you've been around for a little while as a Christian, Campus Crusade for Christ, people know the name. People know the name CRU. People know the name Power to Change increasingly. But of course, sometimes you just got to come back to, hey, this is part of a great, big, worldwide organisation, and you've got one little role to play and leading this strategic development here in Australia. Give us a little insight into your day-to-day type of activity.
Well, Neil, I'm connecting with our church movements team at the moment, specifically working with and coaching church leaders around Australia and helping everyday Christians to use simple ways to make disciples. I also connect with our digital strategy, our online presence, and young people are increasingly online. And so we're looking at and developing systems for how do we make disciples in an online environment. They're my main things at the moment.
And when it's big, it doesn't necessarily mean it's sophisticated in what you're endeavouring to teach people to do, because discipleship and reaching out to people, this is something that we all have to have some ability and confidence and even excitement about doing.
That's right. I think the default has been that we want to leave evangelism and mission to the experts. But increasingly in Australia today, people are reluctant to go to an event where there's going to be an expert. And so the responsibility starts to fall where it should have always fallen, which is on everyday Christians.
We're going to be talking about the MyFriends initiative that's been running now for some time in various churches around Australia. And I know that there's one you've drawn attention to just in our little bit of preparation. There's a church in Launceston in Tasmania that's actually using the MyFriends program very effectively. What's the story there?
Yeah, so Dorothy is their pastor who oversees their children's and youth and young adults ministry. And about 5 years ago, through one of our partners called the Emerging Leaders Program, she encountered our MyFriends training and decided that was so impacted by it, but that she decided to take all of her leaders, all of her children's, youth and young adult leaders through that training. And Dorothy's a very disciplined leader, I'll say. And so as they went through the training, she made sure that they put it into practice together. And the result is that just back in June, we hosted a conference down in the church in Launceston, and they were able to share the exciting stories of the life transformation that had happened. And as a result, their church, their evening congregation, had doubled in size in the space of 12 months.
And interestingly, when we talk evangelism and connecting with people, discipleship in a church setting, you often will have a focus that lasts for a season and then it fizzles.
Right.
There's a thought too, isn't there, that somehow or other, if you're going to have something that is effective in reaching a community and growing a body of believers, you've got to be able to have something that becomes routine. How do you describe that?
Yeah, I think we need to develop habits. And the way that we develop habits is through intentional and repetitive effort, and also the support and encouragement of those around us. And so I don't think evangelism, and particularly this sort of lifestyle, is particularly difficult. A lot of evangelism training has focused on what words do we say. And I know for me, I grew up in a church, and I had attended and listened to lots of sermons and been told I should share my faith, but I never really knew how to articulate it. And so when I was in high school, I tried using lots of jargon, but some simple training from Power to Change when I hit university really transformed my confidence. But it was only later that I realized that unless I was intentional in the habits, it was very easy to lose the contacts with people that would create the opportunities to share the gospel. And so I found MyFriends training particularly helpful in my own life. I moved cities 2 years ago during the pandemic, and I left behind all my existing networks, and so I joined the MyFriends group, and it didn't teach me anything I didn't know, but it gave me the encouragement to put into practice what I knew.
Okay, so you can fall out of the routine, you can fall out of the habit easily. How do you say to people, when you find yourself a group that does encourage you and that does make you feel confident and equipped to be that believer who does like to connect with people, does like to to meet needs and be available. What are your thoughts here about how you actually get that sort of group happening in your local church?
Well, with MyFriends, we're providing this course. It runs for about an hour and a half a week, so it fits in like a small group space in a church. And there's some material we provide now. The latest version we've just released has got all the teaching components in short, bite-sized videos. And then the group leader can facilitate discussion within the group where people then can think through and pray through and encourage each other with stories of people that they're in regular contact with. They're my friends, whether that's family or neighbors or work colleagues or people in their local sporting club. And as they share and pray for opportunities, they can express their love for the people that they're in relationship with, and then look for needs and care for them, and then pray with them.
It's as you said just a little earlier, and telling your own story, when you learn how to do evangelism from someone up on a platform, you can take a lot of things in, converting that to actual action on the ground, or when you walk outside of the church door, or when you're actually in the workplace. Sometimes that's not so easy to do. So interestingly, to come back to, just knowing what to do actually isn't enough. What are your thoughts around this? Because lots of us might know what to do, and then we struggle to remember the last time we actually did something that was actual action.
That's right. Well, I just go back to the Great Commission. In the Great Commission, Jesus says to make disciples, and he doesn't say make disciples by teaching them everything that I've taught you. He says make disciples by teaching them to obey everything that I've taught you. And so when it comes to MyFriends, it's about helping people to obey Jesus. And again, it's not rocket science to remember to care for people and love people and to pray with people, and when the opportunity arises, to share the gospel with people. But it's easy for us to get intimidated, scared, or overwhelmed or distracted. And so we need that regular accountability.
How often do you think we need that accountability? Because I think, you said the MyFriends program sort of meets every week. But, do you need more than that? Do you need something, written there in the front pages of your Bible so that when you open up a Bible in a time of a devotion that you're actually being reminded? Is there something here about, a daily reminder?
I think the MyFriends training, it runs, one day, once a week for 9 weeks, so it fits in a school term. But within that, you might form a group of people who are in the group that I was part of. There were two mothers who were part of a sporting club. They were both athletes themselves, and their kids were involved in the club. And so they then collaborated together and worked out how could they work together in connecting with the people in their club and advancing them the next step towards following Jesus. So the training is a formal environment, and it gives you a chance for feedback. But every week there's going to be opportunities to put things into practice in between, and perhaps people to partner with.
So just simplifying this down to the lowest possible thought about how this can work, because I wouldn't like listeners to think that this was going to be too complicated and you couldn't do this. You can get together with friends around coffee once a week and do this. Is that something you could do? I mean, how simple can this be?
Yes, well, the MyFriends training, I think it needs a deliberate facilitator. And so in my mind, I think of a weekly Bible study group at church, small group, life group, connect group, whatever you call it, growth group. They could do the training for one term, and it's really designed to work well in that environment. If you don't have someone locally who's capable of facilitating a group, then we are running groups online. And so someone can join an online group with a view to even perhaps becoming a facilitator in the future. And so they're available. You can find out about those through the Power to Change website. But it is pretty simple,
Is this something you can add on to an existing friendship group that you might have already? I mean, I'm just thinking, that there's some, in the church that I attend, there's an art group, and I've known that there's been groups that get together because they share a common understanding. They have a child with a disability, or there are those who meet for all sorts of reasons. I mean, some people might go for a walk on the beach. You might have a walk on the beach group. Is this something you can add on to the sort of group, and then all of a sudden what you do to connect with friends becomes intentional according to mission?
That's right. It absolutely can, and it should work that way. So in my home church, the leader of the playgroup ministry decided to take all their playgroup leaders through this. And the playgroup ministry had really struggled coming out of COVID, but with the intentionality that MyFriends provided, this year, both playgroups were oversubscribed with a waiting list. And the church has started to see the benefit of people being intentional about working those relationships. But again, it could happen. The people who are running it, who are participating in it, will then be active in whatever social group they're part of.
We're going to come back in just a few moments continuing our conversation, but I do want to invite listeners to join into our conversation today. You might have your own thoughts on how this all works in practice. And if this turns into a heart-to-heart conversation and raising the real issues of what challenges there might be in small groups, in churches, let it be that. You might like to make your contribution. Let's open our talkback line on 1-800-316-316. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Our special guest is Geoff Folland. Now, Geoff is National Leader, Strategic Engagement at Power to Change in Australia. I'd love to hear from you. We're continuing our conversation. We're going to get into some nitty-gritty things and some practical things just ahead. 1-800-316-316 to offer your own wisdom and insight in a conversation today around what we're calling MyFriends. Now, that's a program, but its focus is lifestyle training. And you might have your own insights today. Our special guest is Geoff Folland. Geoff is National Leader of Strategic Engagement at Power to Change in Australia. He connects with churches and he creates opportunities for people within churches to get a intentional focus on how you connect with people not only in your local church, but through the wider community. This is a very, very good conversation today, and you might like to contribute. So 1-800-316-316. And I said we'll have a heart-to-heart conversation, Geoff, and bringing it down to the reality. And listeners might like to contribute here, but there's a lot of people around just not interested in talking about spiritual things. What are your thoughts here?
I think we'd be surprised about how many people are interested, but they just haven't had the opportunity. And for many of them, the first time the topic comes up, they're coming at it without having thought about it. You know, it's easy for us who live in a Christian environment, who have Christian friends or listen to Christian radio, to forget that for many people, they don't have anyone asking them spiritual questions or raising spiritual issues. And the only thing that they think about church or Jesus is what they might read in the press. And so we need to be aware that the opportunity that we have is actually perhaps to start with them where they're at, to just, by expressing Christian love and care, by offering to pray with somebody. To pray with somebody puts God on the agenda. And they may never have thought about prayer as a solution to their problems. But once you offer to pray, and if they're willing to accept it, and most people are, then suddenly the spiritual realm becomes a little more real.
So you've got to be a person with some words and some actions. Some
right.
will say more words, less actions, or should there just be more actions and less words? There's an ongoing debate, no doubt, around that. I mean, let people read you as an epistle, a living epistle, those sorts of things.
That's right.
What are your thoughts here about words and actions? I guess if you understand the actions, you can implement something straight away, and you can become wise and mature and understand what your words might mean as you go. What are your thoughts here for a balance?
Yeah, I think the key is to find simple ways to express our faith verbally. People can think that we're a nice person or a good person if we act with Christian love, but they won't understand the gospel unless we actually articulate it. But for many people, if you just try to express words, and we've probably all seen this, where people have stood and proclaimed the gospel to people who are not interested. And that's where you get the word Bible bashing from. And nobody wants to be a Bible basher. But if you are loving people, caring for people, and they're interested in talking, then actually you're answering questions that they have. You're meeting their felt need. And that is something that's always welcome. I had a story recently from one of my colleagues who he's reaching out to people in his local neighborhood. And he met a Christian who just moved into the neighborhood, and he was explaining what he does, about how he connects with his neighbors, delivers cookies and so on. And she says, "Oh, I don't do evangelism. I can't do that." And he says, "Well, do you like to bake?" And she says, "Yeah, I like to bake." She says, "Well, there's this single mother down the road who would really love, if you delivered her a cake. She doesn't know that we're going to do this, but how about you bake a cake and we'll go and deliver it to her?" And so the lady says, "Okay, I'll deliver the cake." And so my colleague Tim and his neighbor, this Christian lady, delivered the cake, and this single mother looks at this her new Christian neighbor and says, "Tim's always on about spiritual things. Can you tell me what this is about? Because I've never encountered this before." And suddenly this Christian lady has an opportunity to share her faith where she didn't even think that she could. And so that's the sort of thing we're looking for.
Okay, if we were asking if there are more qualities in a person we might call an evangelist, someone who is a witness. Let's include everyone, because every believer is at least a witness. Not everyone is an evangelist. So what are extra qualities you might add to being a witness? You've just opened up what actually is profoundly huge, baking. We might add to that cleaning, lawn mowing, babysitting. Look, and there might be listeners who can, on a practical level, help us with a list like this, because sowing a seed like this today says our Christian faith is very powerful when it's attached to some action. The trouble is, and if there's people who are not interested in spirituality, you're, in a sales sense, when you're a salesman, You
Yes,
think of cold calling, and
that's right.
only some people have a real gift in doing cold calling, where they knock on a door and they begin to tell a person about their product or service. But people are cold contacts. What are your thoughts here when you're coming across people and you don't know where they're at, but you've got this sort of impression in your mind that people are anti-spiritual?
Yeah, I think we need to be careful. Firstly, whenever people say, "Oh, people aren't interested," I'm just like, I don't know that that's true. People aren't apathetic about life. Perhaps they just don't understand where spiritual things fit into it. And so we part of our goal is to help people understand how the spiritual realm affects every area of their life. But the other thing is, we need to be careful to think that, or to realize that we're not the savior. We're not God, and God is at work in people's lives. And sometimes we encounter them at a point where they're just a cold, they haven't been interested in spiritual things. They haven't had anyone trigger an interest in them. And we might say something and plant a seed that bears fruit that someone else picks, harvests later down the track. But sometimes we encounter people that we've just met for the first time, but God's been at work in their lives for years. And so it's time for us at that point. God wants us to actually invite that person to repent and believe and to be saved. And so what we need to do is not go in with our agenda, but to go in with a sense of discernment and see, what has God been doing in this person's life, and what can I do to join with him in what he's doing?
Funny thoughts going through my mind right now,
Yeah.
because actually, when we're a lifestyle-oriented Christian believer, we are going to do the things that we like to do. And we talk about intentionality and, we all need to be a witness. And, there's some risks with that you might get rejected, or you might even come under some level of persecution. But the sorts of things we typically will warm to, and everyone's different here, but
Yes.
these are things that we actually enjoy doing, or we are skilled at, that will link us with others who enjoy doing those things and are skilled at those things. Somehow or other, finding where you fit with your own gift, your own skill, your
right.
own pastimes is going to be an important element of getting this sort of group together, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think Billy Graham was a great evangelist back in the 60s and 70s and, through many decades. But there's only ever been one Billy Graham. And there are plenty of other people who have seen people come to Christ who are just quiet in their neighborhood. And that's what God's called them to do, just to be faithful with what he's given them, and to not to be passive, but to take the initiative to reach out to those around them. And they'll connect naturally with people that someone like Billy Graham would never connect with.
Funny, when we're talking about an organisation like Campus Crusade for Christ, Crew, Power to Change, these different ways that you can name an organisation that's been so big and so effective all these years, around fairly simplistic things. I'm just reflecting for a moment, because a lot of, perhaps long-time Christian believers will remember when there was this thing called the 4 spiritual laws.
That's right.
You know what? That's a Campus Crusade for Christ initiative, wasn't it? So it was
That's right.
how do you understand the simplicity of the gospel and put it into a 4-part, easy to remember type way of sharing your faith? So when you're talking about simplistic things but routines and lifestyle, some of these things, they begin to build into a foundation, don't they, in the life of a believer?
That's right. The 4 spiritual laws, famously, and we in Australia adapted it to become the Knowing God Personally presentation. And even later, we've now currently got a website called the4.au, which presents the same 4 points using different language. One of them is the classic Knowing God Personally, about God loving you and creating you for a relationship with him, and that sin has separated us from God, but Jesus died in our place to restore that relationship. It also presents a different version where it talks about the honor shame, which appeals more to an Eastern mindset. And then the third version we have on there is a video series with Pastor Scar, who does a digital, outreach to gamers version. So, but the same 4 points are just a framework for a conversation. And I know for me that learning those 3 points, just those 4 points, those simple presentation, then gave me the confidence in a conversation with somebody to work out what is it that they didn't know. Did they not understand something about God, or did they not understand something about sin, or did they not understand something about Jesus, or did they not understand the fact that they needed to make a response to him? And I think that having a simple outline like that allows you to adapt it to whoever you're talking with. And MyFriends training actually includes some basic training on how to use those 4 points.
Does this training work best when you've just got Christians in the group? Or does this actually work best when you've got a mix of people who are a part of your group and some who are not even a part of church at all? Maybe because they know you, they've got some connection with some spiritual things, but how does it work best, do you think?
This is definitely training for everyday Christians, but it does include, after learning the 4, it also includes some Discovery Bible Study training, and it will encourage participants to learn how to read the Bible with someone who's not a Christian. And they can either meet up with one friend or with a small group of friends and start their own Discovery Bible Study. And we've found that Discovery Bible Study method, which has been used, it's a simple method that's used globally, has really seen many people journey through to faith, and even to the point where they then adopt that lifestyle for themselves and invite others in their friendship networks to join a Discovery Bible Study. So our ultimate goal is not just to train Christians, but to see the impact multiplied through the people that they're connecting with.
Well, our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316. We're going to break for news and continue our conversation after Vision National News. Geoff Folland is our guest. He's National Leader of Strategic Engagement at Power to Change in Australia. The Power to Change website is simple to remember too, powertochange.org.au. We're talking about the MyFriends initiative and how you actually turn your Christian walk into a lifestyle, and lifestyle training that actually introduces the mission of God into your lifestyle. So you can visit that website, powertochange.org.au. Geoff's our guest, back with more after news. Great to have you with us on this Friday edition of 2020. We're into some grassroots, nitty-gritty, where the rubber hits the road conversation about what it is to be a Christian believer. Because it's one thing to know some things about the gospel, it's another thing altogether for some to actually make those part of your routine, your actions in your life. And we're talking today about that. And I do want to invite you to join into our conversation. Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316. We're talking about a program, I guess you'd call it, called MyFriends. Helps you get a routine in place because you might know people who are interested in spiritual things, but they've never really had much of a desire to visit a church. It's easy to feel a little inadequate and under-equipped to bridge the gap between where our friends are and where we'd like them to be, as you might even say, and, not pulling any punches. Obedient followers of Jesus Christ who understand who he is, align to his image, and follow in his mission. Well, we're coming around an initiative today called MyFriends that connects people to Jesus and to each other. Our special guest today calls it a lifestyle training. It's a component of the ministry focus of the biggest mission mobilization in the world. Our special guest is Geoff Folland. Geoff is National Leader of Strategic Engagement at Power to Change in Australia. Power to Change is part of the global Campus Crusade for Christ that became known as CRU back in about 2012. In Australia, it's called Power to Change. So, Geoff, we'll take some calls as they might come through. Let's come around something pretty important here for our Australian context. And that is the fact that Australia is becoming more and more multicultural. Some will say multi-ethnic, but people who come to Australia are coming with their own cultural backgrounds. Oftentimes that's a different religious background. We're becoming more multicultural. Does this enhance or does it detract from this sort of thought that we're doing with MyFriends? What are your thoughts here?
I think it makes us feel more intimidated or more inadequate in trying to share our faith because we think that there's just so many different viewpoints of that we're going to encounter if we start talking about spiritual things, that we don't feel like we know how to respond to all of them. And I think there's two approaches we can take to evangelism. One is that we can become experts in everything, which is not something that an everyday believer, follower of Jesus can do. Well, the other approach is to find one simple way that is infinitely adaptable. And I think that each person that we talk to is unique. And if we have a simple tool that is adaptable, then that empowers us, equips us, allows us to engage with them and try to see where God is at work in their life. And so for me, MyFriends meets people where they're at, regardless of what their background is. And it doesn't try to put them all through the same sausage machine. It allows them to be themselves and to be engaged with on their own terms.
Interesting, isn't it? When you've got a multicultural community that you might live in, and the thought that, one day, and not everyone has this thought, but some Christians do, and they say, well, wonder if I might one day go off overseas and into a new environment, new cultural environment, and consider myself a missionary. And you feel like you've got to go overseas to be a missionary. But in our increasing multiculturalism, we get to be cross-cultural missionaries in our day-to-day life. What are your thoughts around the opportunities? And that's not even getting into the fact that when people are coming from different cultures with their own different religious backgrounds and their own religious experience, they're often more interested in talking about spiritual things than ordinary, maybe let's call them white European-style Aussies.
That's right. So that's true. When I was in Bangkok recently for a gathering of our global church leaders, church movements leaders, where Crew was reporting that last year in 2022 we planted 26,000 churches with different organizations in partnership with different organizations around the world. That our African global vice president Bekele was sharing that he'd received calls from a dozen churches in Australia, African migrant churches, asking him for training in how to make disciples. And he said that he couldn't supply that training from where he was located. And so he was encouraging us in Australia to reach out to churches from those migrant communities and provide our training to them. And I know from my own experience that there's Korean migrant churches and many Chinese migrant churches and Arabic churches, and we just we know that the same training that's been working in so many countries around the world will work with the migrant communities here, and not just the migrant communities, but the second generation and third generation of migrants.
Just to pause for a moment and reflect, and I know listeners won't mind, I don't think, if we just stop and pause for a moment. And I think I heard you say this right, that back last year, 2022, around the world with the church planting movement associated with Crew,
Yes.
Campus Crusade for Christ, did you say 26,000 churches were planted?
That's correct.
What does that say to you? And we're talking about a lifestyle way that is cross-cultural, and no doubt the MyFriends focus is happening in lots and lots of different countries around the world. But what does that say to you about the vibrance and the growth of our Christianity around the world, Geoff?
I think what it says to me, it makes me realize just how big God is and how people are the same the world over. As much as we like to focus on their differences, the people are the same. And then I look at what's happening in Australia and I think, God's not seeming to work the same way here at the moment. And our environment in Australia, I must confess, is a little more complex. Multiculturalism, secularism, our prosperity, all are factors that work against us seeing the kind of vibrant church planting that's happening in places like Indonesia or Africa or some parts of Asia. I was talking to one of our leaders who had seen village churches planting 19 generations of churches. So they'd plant a church in one village, and that village would then plant a church in the next village, and so on for 19 generations. But those are all kind of homogenous communities. So when you engage with what works in one environment is easily translated to the next village. Whereas I think in Australia, each person we meet has had such a complex range of influences on them, that we can't assume that one person we talk to is the same as the next person. I remember a few years ago, I was on campus and I met this white Aussie guy who'd grown up in the west of Sydney, and he'd converted to Buddhism. And I was quite surprised that he was a Buddhist, because normally when I think about Buddhists like that, I think of people from Asian backgrounds. But through some influences, he'd converted to Buddhism. And I was like, I can't just look at someone and assume that I know what they think or what they believe.
Okay, let's take a call, 1-800-316-316, to join in our conversation today. Let's take a call from Larry in the Northern Territory. Hi, Larry. Welcome along.
Hello. I just wanted to let you all know I recently went to a church filled with people from Africa, China, Japan, all over the world were there. And I really felt the Holy Spirit was there too. I just wanted you to know. Patterson Road, Malik, Darwin.
Fabulous stuff, Larry. And this is the interesting thing with so many communities. And, I remember some years ago, just shocked because, I've been going along, visiting Sydney from time to time throughout my whole life in some sense. But one visit 4 or 5 years ago, I just realised that when you're in the CBD in Sydney, very few people look like they're Caucasian, European looking. There's just people from multicultures everywhere. And in the Northern Territory, as Larry is saying, and what an experience he has had alongside people from all sorts of cultures from around the world. He mentioned Africans and I think he mentioned Asians. So,
that's right.
Yes, this is something that is happening in churches. And so there is a changing even dynamic of spirituality within churches. How do you see that sort of thing, Geoff?
Yeah, I have been to America, and I know in America there was lots of talk about church growth and about African churches and sort of mainstream churches and then Asian churches. And I realized that America really is made up of a large dominant white population with an African American population and then some sprinkling of Asians or Hispanics. And there's really those four groupings. But when I came back to Australia, those same principles didn't apply because there is no one dominant group anymore. That every city is a dynamic mix of Lebanese migrants and Vietnamese migrants and Cambodian migrants and Hong Kong migrants and Singaporean migrants and European migrants and our churches, I think, do reflect that multiculturalism. Our best churches, our healthiest churches, reflect the dynamic that God's gospel translates culture, transcends culture, and engages with each of us in that point where we have that common humanity of needing a relationship with him.
And the MyFriends initiative, this is designed, clearly because it's being used around the globe, this is designed for people who are coming from even different multicultural backgrounds.
Exactly right, because we're engaging with people where they're at, and we're using a simple approach that is endlessly adaptable to the infinite creativity of the person that God's made.
I want to thank Larry for his call, 1-800-316-316, if you'd like to join in our conversation as we're talking about the MyFriends initiative, and you might have your own thoughts around that. And when we talk about this initiative, which starts with like a small group, and when it's being used effectively and this lifestyle training becomes a part of your Christian experience, that actually leads into the planting of churches and the growth. And as you described when you're talking about the church in Tasmania, it means that your church is going to grow as a result of introducing something that has a lifestyle focus, something that we in such an individualistic type of society, somehow or other you've got to humble yourself, haven't you, and say, yes, I've got a bigger responsibility than just myself or just my family. Somehow or other we've got to be intentional about reaching out.
That's right. And I think there's many church leaders who are frustrated because they want to put on evangelistic events at their church and they tell everyone, oh, invite your friends or invite your work colleagues. But many of the friends or work colleagues that we engage with, we haven't cultivated a relationship, and so there's many times where we're running an evangelistic event and we only have 3 people who aren't churchgoers turn up. And so MyFriends is basically the habit or the discipline of continually cultivating relationships so that when those special events happen in a church, whether it's a Christmas event or whether it's a men's outreach or a women, mothers play group morning, there are people who we've been connecting with and who are prepared to come and hear the gospel. And that may be for them the next step. There are other people we're connecting with who aren't ready, and that's okay. We'll see if they're ready again in the future at some point. But yeah, for a lot of churches, I think it's a very important step that we can't assume happens anymore. I think if you go back to the 1950s or 60s in Australia, church attendance was much more common than it is now, and whether people believed or not, they turned up to church. And so when an evangelistic event was held, there were people in the room who weren't believers but could be called to follow Jesus and knew enough to understand and respond. But today, we can't assume that there is that ready, prepared group of people ready to turn up and respond.
We're taking calls, 1-800-316-316. Let's take a call. Jacob is in Melbourne. Hello, Jacob. Welcome.
Hello?
Jacob.
Hello, my friend.
Jacob, what are your thoughts?
How are you feeling?
Good. Jacob, what are your thoughts?
Maybe you can help me.
Yep. Hit us with it.
Hello?
Yes. Let us know what you're thinking.
Imperial? Talos is the true God of man, ascended from flesh to rule the realm.
Jacob, I'm not sure what to do to respond to your thoughts on this, and I'll bring in Geoff here. Jacob is still on the line. I don't think you're being serious with us, Jacob.
Well, it's great to hear someone like Jacob who's been stimulated to think about spiritual things and to want to declare the message of the gospel. I think that when the opportunity arises, we do the best that we can.
Let's take that as Jacob being stimulated and excited about the gospel. So, Jacob, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316. An interesting set of things that you might hear being contributed to today. You might have your own thoughts as we come around the issues to do with the the MyFriends initiative. 1-800-316-316. Let's come back to something you said, that people are not actually prepared when that invitation comes. When we say there's going to be a special event at our local church, there's a visiting evangelist, a visiting speaker, or whatever it might be, and there's the invitation, bring a friend. When there's no cultivation that has happened, those things tend not to be as successful as they could be. So this is a way to transform what happens in your own church life by having something that happens on a weekly basis that actually is cultivating the opportunity for when those things happen.
That's right. And I think when you've got the training, the weekly accountability, the weekly encouragement of people recording stories of opportunities they've had to love, care or pray with people, that then creates a culture within the church that prepares the way for more people to be ready to be invited to the events. And it's important, I think, in our current world, as we think about the impact of COVID on the local church. So many churches have struggled coming out of COVID to reform community. But this allows us to reform the community, to revitalize our churches that are struggling. But we've also not only had revitalization happen, we've also had people doing church plants. So perhaps one of the Discovery Bible studies that gets started isn't happening in the close proximity of the local church. It's starting somewhere else, and it becomes like a house church. And we have some house church leaders who have got multiplying house churches that are using the training as well. Again, simple methods can be adapted to lots of different settings.
Around these practical things, as you say, love, care and pray, those are elements that come out in the MyFriends program. How we love one another, what place God has in our lives, the fact that you pray, and as you said just a little earlier, Geoff, when you pray, you bring you bring God into the circumstances of your life. And then the caring idea. I mean, it's not just you're imposing your care on people, but you're looking for opportunities to care for people who are now becoming closer to you in that group. And of course, all of that forms this opportunity to be able to share Jesus or to invite them to your church event. So these elements that come out in the program, are they just discussion, or are they presented as points, or are they presented as stories? Loving, praying, caring. How are those presented in the MyFriends program?
Well, they're a combination of reflecting on the biblical passages, plus also some practical advice. And then in a discussion format, when people are wrestling with what do I do next, there's the suggestions and support and feedback from the rest of the group. And the practical examples that come from people who are trying to put into practice. I have a personal story where, as a result of my experience in MyFriends, my wife had joined a gym, and the personal trainer was someone who she ended up having he had a spiritual background, a church background, but he wanted to debate apologetics. And so she said, "Oh, my husband loves to debate apologetics. I'd never been to the gym." And he says, "Well, if he comes to the gym, I'll talk to him about apologetics." So I joined the gym. I took the initiative. I went out of my way to build a relationship. And I found out that actually apologetics wasn't his issue. There's other issues in his life about relationships. And so over the last 6 months, we've been talking about all sorts of different issues and continually engaging in spiritual things. And just recently, he said to me that he's actually considering going back to church after having walked away. And so I'm still praying and trusting that God will work in his life, but I can just see the progress over time, and that came out of putting into practice the simple MyFriends principles.
We've been taking calls. Let's squeeze in one more. Sandy is in Melbourne. Hi, Sandy. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I'm from a migrant community. Have been here in Australia for over 36 years. And so my experience, I just wanted to share my experience in terms of what you're talking about. I came from a Christian background, but South Asian background. Integrating into a church when I first arrived wasn't an issue for me at all, which probably is not the case with a lot of migrants. But over the decades, I have found that church atmosphere, in a sense, the natural atmosphere has changed in the sense that within the church, there's subcultures like youth culture. And so my concern is at present, I do one-on-one witnessing, sharing the gospel with people, but I don't feel comfortable inviting people to the church that I go to or the kind of church that I'm comfortable in terms of the doctrinal side of it, because it's all dark, it's very noisy, it's got flashing lights around, and it was never like that before. And so when we talk about culture, myself, for example, coming from a South Asian culture, alcohol consumption is not looked at as something that's not an acceptable
Sandy,
part of the
you are raising some really important points that go into a deeper conversation around culture in church. And I'll get Geoff's thoughts here for you, because when you're not comfortable with the culture in your own local church, maybe you're tolerating the culture in your local church, you're not likely to invite someone along to it. But thoughts here for Sandy, Geoff?
Yeah, I think there's so many exciting and big issues that she's just raised. And I'd say that as a migrant community, the things that attract migrants to a church is usually that they're connected to their migrant culture and perhaps aren't necessarily appropriate for or the best fit for people who don't share that migrant culture. And I think that's where we can't just rely on what happens within the church. There may be some people we connect with who fit our local church, but at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is to serve the person that we're sharing the gospel with. And if they don't fit our church, then we can happily recommend them to another good local church within their community that would suit them.
Sandy in Melbourne, thank you so much for a great contribution today on 2020. And we've got to wrap up things here. We've been talking about the MyFriends program. And how do people connect with you at Power to Change, Geoff? How do you get this going in a small group or with a group of friends yourself? I mean, do you have to register? Is there a cost associated? How does this all work with Power to Change?
So you can register at powertochange.org.au and look for MyFriends. The cost for a term is $20, the same price it would cost if you bought a Bible study book. We've priced it the same way. You can register online and join one of the online groups. Or if you want to, you can just email our info at powertochange.org.au and request some more information about how to start it in your own local church, and we can have one of our team give you a call and follow up on that. If you're a local church leader, we'd especially love to have a chat to you about how to start a pilot group in your church.
Well, you might have an aspiration to start a pilot group, and it takes a term to go through. Powertochange.org.au. That's how you connect with Geoff personally. That's how you connect with this MyFriends initiative. Powertochange.org.au. It'll work in a small group for your local church. The main concepts are taught in short videos. A facilitator guides the group to think about local applications. You can join an online group, as Geoff said, and you can even be trained as a local facilitator through their online training. It's powertochange.org.au, and look for the link to MyFriends. Geoff Folland, a national leader, strategic engagement at Power to Change in Australia. Geoff, thanks so much for taking some time to share your thoughts and your heart with us today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a privilege.